So I've titled my presentation today called Walking with Integrity. And it's really with sexual integrity. That's going to be our primary focus. And so I want to focus on writing policies, sexual integrity policies, but I want to do it because policies are such a big picture. And so we're going to walk through this piece by piece. Okay? So why am I here? And what drives my passion? So growing up, I was not raised in a very structured home or very structured environment. There was no limitations on what I could watch, who my friends were, what I did. I did not have a curfew as a teenager, so there was basically no rules, which ultimately, at a very young age, around the age of 6, 7-ish, it led a family friend by the name of Fred and Mary Ann Myers. They happened to be neighbors to us at the time. They began to groom me at a very, very young age, even younger than 6. Became very good friends with my parents, ultimately moved out of our neighborhood, but continued the grooming and continued seeing our family. And it ultimately led to one night they took me out to a bar, again, age 6 to 7. My parents were away for the night, and they took me to a bar and ultimately back to their house, where I was sexually abused, raped repeatedly over a 24-hour period. So, needless to say, that obviously changed the entire direction of my life. And so it impacted me in a huge way, which is what drives my passion. So my passion for developing policies and updating policies and the law, and my love for the law, is driven from my childhood experience. And so what I want to do is protect our kids, protect members of the church. So this is not just extended to children, it's also to make a safe place for people to come to church and feel safe. So we're going to walk through how to do that. So here's some of the main points that I'm going to cover today. We're going to recap of why we have policies, including sexual integrity policies. We're going to talk about guidelines for updating those policies. Maybe your church has them, maybe your school has them. If not, we're going to learn how to create them. What does the data show? Why do we even need these policies? What are we protecting kids or members from? What does the future hold? What does the current legislation look like? And we're going to look at some case studies. We're going to look at two cases that I have videos toward the end of the presentation that show you what happens even when you have these policies in place, but yet administration or leadership does not adhere to these policies and they ignore the allegations or the situation. And then lastly, we're going to talk about what takeaways. So let's look at what the scripture says about sexual integrity. For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passion of lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So let's go to our first point. Let's recap of why we have policies, including our sexual integrity policies. So in order to even write a sexual integrity policy, you need to first define what it is. So defining sexual integrity has two components, especially as a Christian. So there's a worldview of sexual integrity, and then there's the biblical standard of sexual integrity. And what we're going to learn how to do in the workshop is we're going to learn how to write the policies where the worldview and the biblical standard view intersect. And that's where you have the Christian view of sexual integrity. And that's pretty much the definition I found, which I thought was great because it captures the worldview and the biblical standard. So it says organizational or personal codes that align sexual behavior with deeply held values, beliefs, and moral standards, often rooted in a specific worldview like Christianity, and emphasize accountability, boundaries, and healthy relationships. So let's learn how to do that. Here's some important components to policies. This not only governs sexual integrity policies, but it also governs all policies. Policies and procedures should reflect who you are as an organization. So if you're writing policies for sexual integrity policy for churches or a school, they should reflect who you are. What are your core beliefs? Where do you stand? That should be reflected. God asks us to have policies and procedures. He wants us to have structure and consistency, which I think Dr. Hamilton spoke about that, about structure. Kids like structure. They need structure. We need structure. Provide clear expectations. It allows people to know what you expect of them, both as your employee or church member or students. It ensures legal and regulatory compliance, making sure you're staying in compliance with federal laws. Promote a safe environment for students, church members, employees. It fosters accountability. We all need accountability. It establishes consistency. That is vitally important. If you have the policies, enforce them on a consistent basis. It helps you to mitigate risk. This is not exactly going to be 100% mitigated. You're never going to write a policy, a sexual integrity policy or any other policy for a church or school that's going to 100% keep you from any kind of allegation or accusation. Most policies are driven by organizations being taken advantage of by their employees. It's very true. I think there's been lots of case law and precedents out there that establishes that. So let's look at guidelines for creating and updating policies, including your sexual integrity policies. Pastors should consult their church board or their conference. School principals should consult their school board members or board chair, along with forming a committee with key appropriate school employees. Policies should be reviewed annually. This is probably one of the most important points on this entire list. Keeping in mind that we live in a fluid world right now. Things are changing so rapidly, and I think it's so important that you review what your sexual integrity policy is and other policies on an annual basis, maybe semi-annual basis, just depending on the structure of your church or conference or school. You need to consult an attorney as necessary. Don't be afraid of that. Attorneys, especially ones that focus primarily on educational law, super helpful. They're experts in that field. They are there to help you. Stay up to date with federal and state laws, vitally important. Don't think that writing a policy today is going to stay in effect and in compliance with federal and state laws a year from now, 2 years from now. Case precedents are set constantly. The U.S. Supreme Court is constantly reviewing cases on a monthly, yearly basis. So make sure you're staying up to date. Only write policies that you plan to enforce. Write policies in a way that allows the organization room for discretion and movement. Make sure you're not just writing sexual integrity policies that are boxing you in. Make sure that you can make decisions if you need to. And most importantly, make policies that relate to universal precautions. Write policies, that sexual integrity policies that are covering a universal group of people. You're not fixating on one group of people. You're covering universally. So let's just focus primarily on the key aspects to sexual integrity policies. Because sexual integrity policies they encompass many different layers. So here's a few hot button policies to consider. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I think most of you are familiar with that. That's the employment. That's what helps you from being discriminated against as an employee. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. Sexual harassment, sexual assaults, misconduct, social conduct, code of conduct, often connected with Title IX. Language, sexual standards policy, mostly used in religious settings like churches or schools. Diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, most of that's included in your organizations. And ministerial exception. So out of this list, there's three that I really want to focus on, and that's the Title VII, Title IX, and ministerial exception. But one point I really want to highlight, which we'll learn more about in the workshop, something I learned in preparing for this presentation was a term I had never heard of before in my 24 years of legal experience, and it's called quid pro quo sexual harassment. And I was very intrigued by that because I had never heard of the term. So what that basically means is that in a school setting, if a teacher grooms or does something to gain a favor from a student that is unwanted by the student. So basically what that means is if the teacher is refereeing a football game at school and the student, has a call and the teacher lets the call go because later he or she's going to ask for a sexual favor from the student and expect it in return, that's quid pro quo sexual harassment. I had never heard of that before. So it's very intriguing. So that's kind of a new thing to kind of pay attention to. So let's move on and talk about Title VII. So basically, the Title VII Act, it prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Most of you are all familiar with this. If you've ever worked anywhere, you've definitely been made aware of this. But the aspect of this that I really want to focus on is the term sex. And the reason that that is so important is the very next point, the case law, which is Bostock v. Clayton County, it sets a federal law precedent, meaning it's a landmark United States Supreme Court case, and it's a civil rights decision in which the court held that the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protects employees against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. So that's important to make note of, and we're going to cover that heavy in the workshop. Title VII applies to private employers of 15 or more employees, and ministerial exception, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, that is a part of the Title VII exemption. So that talks about pastors or religious employees of a church or potentially a school. But we're going to talk about that. So let's move on to Title IX. Title IX prohibits sex-based discrimination in any education program or activity that receives federal financial assistance. So that means if you run a private Christian school, but you are accepting federal funds, Title IX funds is what they're called, then this applies. This law applies to you. The religious exemptions, there are some religious exemptions that may apply, but you need to review this very heavily in order to determine whether or not that is truly the case in whatever you're doing, school, church. In 2025, so just this year, I wanted to highlight something that this is super significant about sexual integrity. In 2025, the Eastern District of Kentucky, which is a federal court, they ruled, and this was a huge win for the conservatives, by the way. It basically reversed the Biden administration's ruling of 2024, which basically said that it prohibited discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. So what does that mean? That basically means that the Biden administration said, if you receive Title IX funds, then you cannot discriminate students based on their gender identity or their sexual orientation. So just this year, in 2025, the Eastern Kentucky District Court decided to reverse that. And they said, that's not the case. We're going to go back to the original definition of the term sex. And so that's a huge win. And so the 2025 ruling found that it was contrary to the law's original intent. And therefore, the court ruled that the original 2020 Title IX regulations will be in effect unless the Trump administration wants to reverse it, which at this juncture, it doesn't appear to be the case, but that's certainly subject to change, as we all know. So the ministerial exception. What is this exactly? Well, it's defined as the Title VII exemption that is the legal doctrine in the United States barring the application of anti-discrimination and other laws governing the employment relationship between a religious institution and certain key employees with ministerial roles. The thing I want to point out about this is only a very small part of the actual analysis for ministerial exception. This should not be used as a get-out-of-jail-free card. What does that mean? You should not assume that because you're a pastor, you are covered and you can do whatever you want to do and fire whoever you want to. Or an education leader. You should review this because it's highly fact intensive. So there is not just A, B, C, and D, and boom, you're covered. You've got to take a lot of different facts into consideration. And there's a case law that sets this precedent, which is the Billiard v. Charlotte Catholic High School. I encourage you to review that case and certainly consult an attorney if this should ever arise in your church or school. So let's look at what the data shows. Why do we need policies? What is the data out there that says that we need policies? Why do we even need to do this? So here's some important statistics in education to contemplate. If you have a church school, maybe you're a school board member, maybe you're a board chair. These are important. About 10% of students will experience an educator's sexual misconduct by the time they graduate high school. Very sad to me. Verbal comments of a sexual nature are the most common form of educator sexual misconduct reported. Most perpetrators are male, coming in at 89.1%, and they are teachers at 63.4%, or their coaches and gym teachers, 19.7%. Here's some important statistics for a church setting. Now, the first 3 bullet points are not limited only to the churches. It's worldwide. So 63% of rapes that do occur are never reported to police, while only 12% of child sexual abuse cases are ever reported to the police. With my own story, I didn't report it to police. I didn't know who to report it to. I was 6 or 7 years old. I had no clue what had even happened to me at that point in my life. Later, Fred committed suicide. So I never even had the opportunity to report him to police. I wish I had, but I never had the ability. My parents never had the ability to hold him accountable. Or his wife, which I will get into more of my story on Friday's workshop. Next point, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 71 men have reported that they have experienced rape at some point in their lives. More common than we realize. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys reported that they are sexually abused at least once in their life before ever turning 18 years old. Staggering. Religious institutions have been implicated in widespread sexual abuse scandals. Some institutions include the following: the Catholic Church, evangelical Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses, Orthodox Judaism, Church of Latter-day Saints, Church of Scientology. I'm sure there's more that are not on this list. So just things to be aware of. So what does our future hold? What does it look like when we put all the data together and the why and the components of sexual integrity? What does the future look like? If you want to update your sexual integrity policies, what does all this future talk about legislation and the rights of communities? So let's look at what it says. So here's a few things for you to consider when talking about updating your sexual integrity policies. There was an article written by USA Today on August 17th that said Oklahoma will require teachers from New York and California to prove that they back America first. Well, why is this significant? Well, Oklahoma was trying to attract more teachers into their public school system. And they had some teachers applying for jobs from New York and California, and they decided to put a law in place that basically says that regardless of the subject or the grade, they will have to show that they know the biological differences between females and males. This will be implemented by the U.S. Department of Education, and it will be called the America First certification. The purpose of the test is to ensure that they weed out teachers with opposing views from the state standards. Oklahoma does not agree with the California Healthy Youth Act, which was passed in 2016, which essentially requires public school lessons across the state teaching lessons exclusively of LGBTQ students. And the lesson goes further to say that they must be inclusive of the LGBTQ students and same-sex relationships, and teach the students about gender expression, gender identity, and explore the harm of negative gender stereotypes about all sexual orientations and what LGBTQ actually means. So Oklahoma said, we're not going to have that. And so they implemented this America First certification. And CNN just posted an article on September the 4th that says that the DOJ, which is the Department of Justice, is looking at ways to ban transgender Americans from owning guns. Now, why is that significant for this conference? Well, it just goes to show that essentially they're trying to trend more in the ways of a more conservative approach rather than what has been done in the past. They are trying to implement this in the wake of the Minneapolis Catholic Church shooting. The Trump administration wants to fight against the rights of transgender Americans, according to this article. ABC News posted on September the 9th that a Hong Kong judge ruled in favor of a lesbian couple's parental recognition. Why is this important? Well, this was a landmark case for that particular country because it's building the framework for Hong Kong to recognize same-sex partnerships, which has not ever been done in the past. So you still have some countries still fighting legally for the rights, and you have some states in America still fighting for the rights on the other side. So it's still a battle ongoing. So it's just things to consider as you're talking about your sexual integrity policies. And lastly, as far as this is concerned, when you're talking about your sexual integrity policies, there was an article published by Miller and Zois LLC. It's a law firm, and they just published this on September the 1st. It's an overview of sexual abuse lawsuits. Who can sue and why? Any student or former student who was sexually abused by a teacher or another student on school grounds. Schools may be liable for negligent hiring, supervision, failure to report, and ignoring red flags. And civil lawsuits are much more successful than actually filing criminal charges, because oftentimes it's a little bit harder to prove criminally. And so this is very dear to my heart because it really speaks to me and my own story and my passion for wanting to protect our students, our kids, our church members. And it's very important that when someone alerts us of something, that we very much take it seriously and have these protocols in place for doing so. So here's some case studies. We're going to take a look at, this is not even a drop in the bucket legally of case law and case precedents. But the first two cases are ones that are just staggering, that are going to show, and we're going to watch 2 video clips about these in just a second. They're going to show you what happens when administration in a school or a church does not take allegations seriously. And so I'll let you, and we'll cover those a little bit more in the workshop as well. The other 3 bullet points are cases that I've already previously mentioned. The reason I added the Curl v. Beltsville Adventist School, that's actually a school in Maryland. That's an interesting case for your free time, if you ever want to Google it and read it. That deals with the ministerial exception. And that was a very interesting case to me to read. So I encourage you to look it up and read all of these cases. So let's watch a clip on the Cunane versus Moraga Middle School. Oh, whoops. How do I hit play? Is it not playing? Okay, so I was really hoping it would play for you guys. Maybe we'll get it to play in the workshop. So basically, this particular case, the Cunane case, is it was very disturbing, to say the least. So essentially, Kristen Cunane is a very prominent swim instructor. I think she currently teaches or instructs swimming at Cal Berkeley, who is, I don't know, they're very nationally ranked in swimming. And basically, she experienced in middle school sexual abuse over years. from her PE teacher, which was a woman, which was slightly unheard of. The teacher went as far as to hide under her bed in her house. She would abuse her while her parents were sleeping just down the hallway. And the teacher basically terrorized her for years. This went on for years. This is not a one-off situation. She groomed her because at the same time, you had the science teacher, Dan Witters, who was also abusing students separately. And so what's ironic is that the PE teacher, Judy Correa, reported Dan Witters to administration for sexually abusing students. When administration failed to take this seriously and take action, it actually empowered Judy Correa to begin abusing Kristen Cunane. And so she groomed her because all this was happening with Dan Witters and students were afraid. And so Kristen decided to confide in Judy Correa because she seemed like a safe female teacher. She didn't feel fearful of her. And she won the trust of Kristen. And she began taking her home. And it started out very, just small things, touching, then trying to kiss her, and then it just escalated to the locker room, to hiding in her under her bed for years. And so if you really watch the entire 48 Hours episode about this case, which is about an hour long, I encourage you to watch it. It's just very informative. Ultimately, what happened is Kristen Cunane never reported anything. She was too afraid. So she goes for years holding this in, and she ends up finding this man that she wants to marry, and his name is Scott, and he encourages her to report this gym teacher. And this is years later, like many, many years, decades later. And she was afraid, and so the police told her, well, if you can get her, because it's been so many years, there's a statute of limitations, if you can get her to admit to it, then that's great. So they wiretap her phone. Kristen, calls Judy Correa and ultimately gets her to confess in detail of what she actually did. And so she is now serving a prison sentence for that, which she should. So very interesting case. The Sandusky case, we can go into that far more detail. That is way more involved. Some of you might even be familiar with it. It was the Penn State versus the Jerry Sandusky. Similar things. He groomed young boys. Things were happening in the locker rooms. Things were getting reported to the head coach. He was an assistant coach at the time, and head coach didn't do anything with the allegations because they were winning football games. They were becoming state champions. They were, just top of the world in the football world. And he didn't report it. And so the abuse kept happening. And there's multiple victims. Ultimately, the CEO served a prison sentence of Penn State. The head coach, Jerry Sandusky, was charged, I think, with 45 counts of child felony charges. I mean, it goes on, but just very disturbing things out there that can happen when we don't put these policies in place and adhere to them and enforce them. So some of the key takeaways I want you to have as we transition to our workshops. I want you to review your policies. Now's the time. You've got time to review them and make some changes and get your school board involved, your conference, get an attorney. It's just very important that you do this and do it today. If you don't have sexual integrity policies or a section in your handbook that talks about this, create one. Now's the time. You've got things in place that's more legally things in place that can help you. If you have a sexual integrity policy, review it. Does it align with biblical standards and our current federal and state laws? I would encourage you to take this time to review it and have an attorney help you or your board. Thank you so much for listening.
Just a second. Okay, thank you very much, Beth. Do you see the relevance of why policies and procedures are so important in our churches and our schools? And it seems that I don't think that we've turned a blind eye. I don't think that in Christian culture that we realize the magnitude of what's going on in our culture that's actually coming into the church schools and also to the churches. I know that in the last 15 years, as I've been speaking to Week of Prayer audiences in our academies, I've noticed a decline in personal space. And it's interesting because it was nothing for girls to stroke another girl's hair or, to, sit really close to a girl or whatever. But now the guys are starting to emulate that. And as I've seen this, and I brought it to the attention of some of the staff members, they really just don't know what to do. So what I've really realized is that, it really begins, I believe, in the handbooks, and that I love the universal precautions. Beth and I have talked a lot about that. When I worked in a hospital, when AIDS came out back in the 1980s, they came up with this term, universal precautions, because if we treat everybody as if they could potentially be infected, then you're not going to get it. And so the idea is universal precautions for the girls and the guys about physical space, personal touch, because even girls that may misunderstand, a caress or running their hands through the hair, what if that child is struggling with same-sex attraction as well? So that, again, is not only encouraging, but also very confusing for a child that may want to follow Christian principles on sexuality. So anyway, thank you so much, Beth. And what we're going to do is we're going to segue. We've got just a couple of minutes, so this is perfect timing. Now you must decide. Did you guys see Sophie's Choice? Right? Anyone remember Sophie's Choice? Now you have to decide. Are you going to go and watch Beth Kendrick, or are you going to stay here and watch Dr. Julie Hamilton? So anyway, I wish you the best. And the good thing is both will be recorded, so you'll be able to access the one that you don't watch. So again, if you're interested in watching Beth, if you'll go out these doors here and go to the left all the way down, on the left is the Family Life Center, which is also the dining room where you ate breakfast, okay? I have to reiterate to you that the really good news is the fact that these programmings all day are free. And because they're free, we don't have food available to feed everybody. So lunch will follow the presentation. And again, lunch is provided for our speakers and for our volunteers. But there are some really great restaurants in the area. I recommend Baguette de France, which is across the street. There's also the Andrews University cafeteria and some other places in the area as well if you're interested. So if you're a little bit confused, come and talk to me. And again, let's dismiss now, or let's stand together as we close in prayer, and then we'll dismiss to the different programs, all right? And thank you again, Beth.
You're welcome.
Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, for everything that's been accomplished already today, testimony from our dear friend Brittany, and now, Lord, the presentation from Dr. Hamilton and my friend Beth Kendrick. And now, Lord, as we segue into the workshop time where we can really explore some of these details a little bit more, I pray, Lord, that you will bless and guide in the decisions of where to go and to listen to more. And I also pray for the speakers as well as they present their information. Bless and keep us, I pray, Lord. Bring us back after lunch according to your will in Jesus' name. Amen.